Anthony Hartcher, the Joyful Journey Mentor. And today we're talking about a topic that keeps popping up in my life, and it's on expectations, happiness, and how expectations affects our happiness and fulfillment and joy in our lives, or experiencing any of those in our lives. And it's like an expectation trap that we can find ourselves in, and setting ourselves up for these falls, or I guess perceived falls. They're not really falls, because in essence we had an unrealistic expectation. So let me start with my story and where this episode comes from. It starts with a conversation I was having with my father about his resilience and how he got through certain challenges in his life. And he sort of what I concluded from the discussion was that he had pretty low expectations on life, and hence he was able to find the best in every situation, because he was coming off such a low base. And I was thinking, well, that would help as well. Like if we don't have unrealistic expectations, and we just have an expectation that things are going to be challenging and tough, then when they're not, we get we get to experience that, hey, this is good. But when they're tough, we're set ourselves up for that toughness and having to put up with that challenge. And then I also had this conversation with the electrician that came over and helped do my security, and well, not security, it's the fire alarm system. And anyway, he did that, and it's a Friday afternoon job. And I said to him, I said, "You're wrapping up for the day. You got the weekend ahead of you." And he said, "Oh, I've got one more job." And I said, "Oh, in your field of work, you wouldn't know what you're going to uncover in the next job." And he goes, "Oh, don't you worry, mate. I always expect the worst." And so, he's setting himself up to expect the worst. But if the job's easy, then, he's going to experience, hey, oh, great, I've got the weekend. But if it's really difficult, he's already got that expectation. And so he sort of doesn't set himself up for a huge fall in that process. And I was just recently attending my sporting team play, the Parramatta Eels, if you don't know, and I was watching them. And the previous two games, they got absolutely flogged. I was at the one the week before where they got flogged, and there wasn't much to celebrate. And so I actually went to this third game with really low expectations, and I really enjoyed it. It was a game, again, we lost, but what I loved was I really just connected with what I could get out. Like, it wasn't sort of, I've got this expectation that my team will win, and therefore if my team doesn't win, I'll be disappointed. It was, well, what can I look for that is going to bring fulfillment to me? And it was like, effort from the players. It was them doing their best and seeing an improvement on last week. And I could see that they're putting in a massive effort, and a really gallant and courageous effort. And that gave me so much fulfillment, is because I wasn't expecting them to beat the other team or anything like that. It's just put up a fight, show that you're a team that's competitive. And I think that's how we want to embrace life, is do what we can the best we can. And I often give this analogy, is that every day we wake up with given a set of cards, and it's just playing that set of cards that's in front of us the best we can. And that's all we can do with life, is just play with what's dealt in front of us the best we can, and do the best with what we've got in terms of tools and resources to best play that set of hand. And look, in time, you'll get better at playing with it, because you'll become more resourceful, more creative, and more knowledgeable in time. But at the time, you just do the best with what you've dealt with, and not have an expectation that it's not successful unless I win this game. And this brings me to a client conversation I had this morning. And he had a bit of, apprehension. And he told me this at the end of the consultation, was he had an apprehension of attending this consult because he hadn't achieved the massive weight drop he achieved in the previous consult. That he had some glowing news to share with me. And like, I would then measure what he put in the last 2 weeks based on the outcome. But what he shared with me was even more impactful. He didn't have the glowing statistic that I've dropped a huge amount of weight, and therefore, I've been doing the work, what he shared with me was what he'd learned over the last 2 weeks and how he was more aware of the effects of what he was putting into his body and the output that. And so for me, from a practitioner, that was better or a much greater progressive thing than the couple of weeks before or the month before, where he was sharing a massive drop in weight, because of the learning that comes when we we think we failed, right? But when we look for the learnings and we find the learnings and we think, oh, it wasn't such a failure, because he was thinking, well, I don't have the huge weight loss drop, therefore I'm a failure. Whereas he came to me with some profound insight of what he discovered. And I thought that was incredible in terms of taking that forward into the future. And so what we discussed was what other ways in which we can measure your success other than the scales, because the scales, there's so much that can influence the scales in terms of, well, the scales themselves can be, not working as well, whatever, the battery needs changing, or you're not weighing in at the same time each day, and there's a bit of error in that also. That when you're measuring your overall weight, it includes your bone density, of course, your fluid within your body, which can be, fluctuate quite a bit, your muscle mass and your fat mass. And so your how do you know which one's changing? And I said to him, how do you know that you're still, like, you might have think that you're plateaued because of the scales telling you plateaued, but you might be losing fat mass and gaining muscle mass and not see a difference on the scales. And he thought, well, that's possible because in the gym, I've noticed that I'm getting stronger. Well, in order to get stronger, you have to be gaining muscle mass, right? So I think he really walked away from that consultation thinking, maybe my measure was, or I just had this one measure and I was fixated on that one measure. And if I didn't hit that one measure, I'm not successful. There's so many ways to measure progress. And I think this is really the takeaway for this talk, is that we can have an expectation that it's got to be this way or I'll be disappointed. And therefore, if it doesn't happen, which is a high probability in most cases, that then you're going to be filled with disappointment. Whereas if you have a number of measures and a way of measuring progress, you can think, okay, this is not where I wanted to be, but hey, I've noticed some progress in this area because you've got other metrics. It's like me and podcasting, for example. So people talk a lot about podcasting downloads, but that's not the be all and end all measure. Podcasting downloads, there's so many other ways, is like, what's their likelihood of listening to the full episode, what's their engagement of the podcast, is the new downloads or existing people, or what's happening with the distribution. And again, the algorithm can affect, who's seeing it and who's not. And there's always changes in the algorithm in terms of these platforms and how they want to distribute the episode. And so some of that is out of my control. I mean, I can control what I talk about, but the timing of which I release it might not be what people are looking for at the time. And so therefore the algorithm doesn't push it out far and wide. The algorithm will base it, based on what's topical and what people are interested in. And so that, I really don't know, when I release the podcast, as to whether it's going to be topical. It might be topical now, but not in the future. And so those are some of the things that I have some control but not full control. And so I've looked at other statistics, or not statistics, but other measures of progress. And for example, I look at, okay, am I attracting guests onto the podcast? And yes, I am attracting guests. People want to come onto my podcast, which is great, because in the early days, I was really struggling to find guests to come onto the podcast, but now I don't have that issue. So that's progress. It means the podcast is getting out there. People are talking to me about the podcast because they're seeing what I put out in social media. So obviously it is creating some awareness and it is getting out there slowly but surely. And the other thing is I've noticed that every time I do a podcast, I learn something. I learn something either about my delivery style, my presentation style, or if I'm interviewing a guest, I learn something from them. And so my knowledge base is increasing. The other thing I've noticed is I'm not as nervous or uncomfortable going into a podcast episode like I used to be. I used to be very nerve wracking. Oh, what happens if I get stuck and I can't find the words? Or what happens if I lose track? Or, just start, all these things, what ifs. And I'm not too concerned about that. I have a general outline in my brain, and because I'm relaxed and more comfortable, I can find that I can generally recall what I'm looking for. Whereas before I was really tense and nervous, and I would struggle to find those recollections. And then with more pressure, you can't find it, right? And it's like, I can't remember that name. I can't remember that name. I can't remember that name. And the minute you relax, you remember the name. So there's so many ways in which we can measure success, and we get fixated on a one way of measurement of success. For my client, it was weight. That was success. But he's now realized there's so many other avenues of progress, or the measurement of progress, that he needs to look. If he feels that he's not making progress, where is he making progress? So we're we are making progress, but it depends on our definition of progress, right? And we want to come up with a broader definition of progress. It's the same as relationships. We can sometimes fantasize that the relationship should be like this based on Hollywood and the romanticism that Hollywood presents on relationships. And when, we're arguing, we think, oh, that doesn't happen in good relationships. We shouldn't argue, and that's bad. And therefore the relationship's going bad. But in actual fact, I had this conversation again with someone else today, was that it's through the arguments, through the conflict, we get to know each other better. We get to see a different perspective. And so there's the actual relationship comes, or the growth of the relationship comes from the challenges and the difficulties we face and the arguments we have. And so we should be embracing it, because the relationship, if we look at it from this perspective, obviously, if we look at it from the measure that if we're having arguments, it's a failed relationship, and then we keep thinking and looking for ways in which we support our justification that it's a failed relationship, and therefore the relationship fails. But if we think, okay, if we're having arguments and conflicts, we're actually learning more about one another at a deeper level, and we can understand each other's perspective at a deeper level, and therefore the relationship is deepening. And so we should, like, not we should, but it is a perspective to look at, is when you're having an argument or a conflict, is what have I learned from it? What have I gained from having that? As opposed to, oh, that's just bad, and we sweep it under the table. But did I, in that conversation, did I actually hear something from them that I didn't know, or I didn't know that they were feeling this way, or I didn't know that they were going through this, and therefore I know something more about my partner that I didn't know before the conflict or the argument. So it is really much better for us to step back and often look at the bigger picture of what's gone on, as opposed to a very myopic focus on what success looks like in relationships, in health, in business, in whatever it might be. It's really helpful to think, okay, I don't feel like I'm making progress, but actually step back and go, where am I making progress? And so I could always look at downloads in podcasting as the measure of progress. But, you know, some of the progress that I made is actually just turning up and doing podcasts, right? And making sure that I have at least one a week. And in actual fact, recently I've been doing more than one a week. And so I'm overachieving in terms of my original goal of doing one a week podcast. And that was a challenge to begin with. But now I find it easy to do two a week, and sometimes three or four a week, right? So I'm actually getting more comfortable with the whole medium of podcasting. I'm a more comfortable guest on other people's podcasts. And it's just come through me looking at a broader lens of what progress looks like in the podcasting arena, as opposed to getting fixated on downloads. I would have given up a long time ago if the measure of success was purely on downloads. And so when you look at relationships, look at other ways to measure progression in the relationship. And it might be through, if you're having more arguments, then you're better understanding one another. Or, you might not be listening. I mean, they have to yell in order for you to listen, but there's still a wake up for you. There's still a learning for you that you can take away as to why you're having more arguments. And so then getting back to the expectations is that we don't want to have an expectation of a one-sided success or a unrealistic success. We really want to set the expectations that, yes, we want to move forward in life, because by moving forward we grow, and we ultimately, if we continue to grow, we thrive and improve. But the way in which we measure that progression forward, we need to look at a holistic and a much broader lens, as opposed to a myopic lens and just a one measure, a one outcome, because that is very narrow-sighted. And in the process, you will find that you're disappointed more often than not, and you probably give up sooner rather than later. So I think if the takeaway here for you listening to this episode is have I only got one measure of success? If you do, then how else can I measure success or progress moving forward? And if you want to look at the holistic lens, in like, how is this, what is this teaching you in all areas of life? What is this teaching you in the areas that are really important to you? And if we look at, how we're gaining or moving forward in all those areas, then one area might not be moving forward, but some other area is, which therefore we're not stagnant. And so with my client, he thought he had stagnated over the last 2 weeks, but he'd got stronger. But he was stagnated in terms of the scales, but where had he progressed was with his strength and beyond his expectations, because he had low expectations around strength and being able to lift his own body weight in terms of chin-ups, and he was able to exceed his expectations. Whereas on the scales, he's plateaued. He's not making the progress. But where is he making progress? It's in another form. And so the progress is always somewhere in your life. You're making progress somewhere. It's just that you're myopic and just thinking that my life's not progressing unless it's progressing in this one area, but it'll be progressing somewhere else, because our energy is flowing somewhere. If it's not flowing and going well in that area that you think is stagnated, then somewhere else it is flowing to and progressing. So I just want you to realize that at the end of the day, we can really set ourselves up for disappointment and lack of joy and happiness when we have unrealistic expectations, or expectations of just a one measure or one-sided outcome. In my case, for the Parramatta Eels, it used to be that they had to win when I went to a game. How unrealistic that is, based on history and their win ratio. So now I look for other measures of success for my team and for me to have more fulfillment watching the game. And I just want to share that I was sort of related to one of, well, I celebrated the success of one of the players who had been through huge adversity in the off season and thought he'd never play the game again, and no club wanted him, and he was given an opportunity at the Eels. He actually went back to, another form of income that obviously wasn't his passion. His passion was playing the game of rugby league. And he was given the opportunity by my club to play. And this was his first game since, thinking that he'd never play again or potentially never play again. And he was able to play that game. And he scored some points, scored a try. And he was so emotional when he, just realized how much he missed the game, how much he loved the game, and how much he was grateful for being back. And it was that, seeing that moment was fantastic. My team lost that game, but I was able to find moments in that game that brought huge amounts of joy, fulfillment, and satisfaction. And I walked away from that game. I didn't feel like a loser. I felt like I had something to celebrate. I celebrated the team's progress. I celebrated the team's courage and determination and never giving up, never giving up. And that was something that resonated within me with the podcast, because I haven't hit huge numbers with my downloads, but I've never given up. And I've been podcasting now. This is my 5th year and I love it. And I do more than one episode a day and I embrace it. I don't get as nervous, and it has really helped me in terms of my articulation, my communication, my knowledge. And so I'm really grateful to have the podcast. Now I've got 2 podcasts, The Joyful Mate, which you're listening to now. And I've also got the Health Up podcast, both of which are continuing. And I love them both. And I'm going to continue podcasting regardless of the downloads. But just on the downloads front, I'd love if you find this beneficial, the information, please share it with others, because my mission is to enhance and enlighten the well-being of others. And I want to get to as many people as possible. Hence why I do podcasting, because it is an avenue to get to many as people as possible. I want to help as many people as possible. And so share it with those who you think would resonate with the message I'm sharing and they could benefit. Please share it with them. I'd love it to get to them. So please share the episode. Please like the episode. Please give feedback on the episode, because this is how my podcasting ability or my podcasting success grows, is through your feedback. So please give me feedback. Please rate the show. And I really appreciate your attention and you giving me some of your time, which is really important, knowing that you've given some time to listen to the episode to me, and I'm glad that you're getting some value, and please share it with others that will get value. So thanks for listening. Continue to listen and continue to experience joy in all forms, in many forms, by looking for other ways to measure success and to broaden your expectations. Broaden expectations, not have myopic expectations. So thanks for listening.